Okay, so this is the essentials that you need to know for graphing sine and cosine. I just want to start off with what we are actually graphing. So at the top of the page here, you see a set of axes. It's a trig axis. So sine and cosine are graphs of the x or y coordinate as you go around the unit circle. Cosine is a graph of the x coordinates, so we're going to be graphing those. The horizontal axis here are the angles as you're moving around the unit circle. So we start at 0 radians and then go all the way around the circle and graph the x coordinates. So for cosine, when the angle is 0, the x coordinate is 1. And then this next dot here is pi over 6. At pi over 6, the x coordinate on the unit circle is square root of 3 over 2. And then at pi over 4, it's root 2 over 2. Pi over 3, it's 1/2. And then when you get to pi over 2, this dot here, the x coordinate is 0. If you continue around the circle, you're going to get a graph that looks like this. And then once you make it all the way around the circle to 2 pi, you're back up at 1. So if you connect all the dots, you get a shape that looks like this. So that is what one cycle of cosine looks like. We could keep going around the unit circle forever and ever, so this graph will go on to infinity, making the same shape over and over again. Sine is similar. When we start at 0 radians, when we start rotating, the y value, so now we're doing something, we're graphing the y values we go around. So at 0 radians, the y value is 0. And then at pi over 6, the y value is 1/2. At pi over 4, the y value is root 2 over 2. Pi over 3, the y value is root 3 over 2. And then once you get up to pi over 2, the y value is at 1. Then as you keep rotating, the y values are going to start to decrease because the maximum y value around the unit circle is 1. So you're going to get a shape that looks like this. Once you make it all the way around, once you make it halfway around the circle to pi, your y value is back at 0. At 3 pi over 2, the y value is -1. And then once you finish the lap and you're back to where you started, the y value is back to 0. So you get a shape that looks like this. So the green function is the basic graph of y equals sine x, and the red is the basic function of y equals cosine x. Okay, so vocabulary before we move on. The midline of a trig. So I just graphed the basic, with no transformations, sine x and cosine x. We can make a bunch of different transformations to trig functions, and that's what the graphing part of this unit is about. On this page, I have just graphed a random trig function just so we can get some vocabulary down. The midline is halfway between the minimum and the maximum value. It's usually represented by a dotted line. In this case, the midline is 4. So y equals 4. Amplitude. The amplitude of a trig function is the distance from the maximum to the midline. And in this particular trig function, the midline, or the amplitude, is 3. The period is how long does it take for the function to complete one cycle. So if you look from here to here, this has completed one cycle. So we need to figure out how far that's gone. So let's find two spots that are labeled, that have x values that are labeled. So here's pi, right? And then a cycle. So here's one cycle of this trig function, and then it starts repeating again. The period started at 0, and it took until pi to complete a cycle, so the period of this function is pi. That's how long it took to complete a cycle. K is the number that actually appears in the equation for the function. You're going to need to be able to connect K to figure out the period. There's a simple little formula: period equals 2 pi over K. K is going to be in the equation you're given. Here we know that the period is pi. If you solve this for K, you get the K equals 2. And if we were to write the equation for this function, K would be 2. Horizontal shift is how much to the left or right the function has been shifted. In the basic versions that I just drew on the previous page, sine and cosine both start at 0. The cycle starts at 0. But you can see here, if we look at this as a sine function, the starting point here isn't exactly at 0. And if you look at it as a cosine function, the starting point for this cycle is also not at 0. So we need to figure out how much has it shifted to the left or right. Okay, so to figure that out, you can look at this point and figure out what is the x-coordinate there. That looks like it's going to be pi over 3. So in this case, if we were going to write an equation for this as a cosine function, there would be a minus pi over 3 in the equation. Anyway, so just in terms of vocabulary, that's the vocabulary we're going to be using to start graphing. So now we're going to look at some examples. Okay, so standard form of a sine or cosine function is y equals a cosine times k times x minus b plus c. So in the formula, a, the number out front, is the amplitude. So again, that's the distance in between the midline and the maximum of the function. K is the number I was telling you about that controls the period. B is the horizontal shift. And C tells you where the midline is. So in this example, I know that the midline is at -5. You get to listen to my dog bark. The amplitude is 2. That's the number out front. To figure out the maximum value that the function is going to take on, you just take the midline and then you add the amplitude. So -5 plus 2 is -3. To get the minimum, you do the midline minus the amplitude. So the minimum is going to be -7. The horizontal shift in this problem is, so you see this, do it in green, plus pi over 4. So the graph is going to shift by pi over 4 units, but when you see a plus sign, that's actually a shift to the left in the negative direction. So this graph is going to start at -pi over 4. To figure out the period, the little formula I wrote is right there. Period equals 2 pi over k. Here, k equals 1/2. Bloop, bloop, bloop. There it is. So period equals 2 pi divided by 1/2. And that equals 4 pi. A cycle is going to end. To figure out where the cycle ends, you take the starting point, which we discovered was pi over 4, and then we add the period. So -pi over 4 plus 4 pi. You're going to have to make a least common denominator to add these together. Take my word for it, you're going to get 15 pi over 4. So the cycle will end at 15 pi over 4. Did I make a blank graph on the next page? No. Okay, so if I were to graph this, I'll make a graph right here. We don't have a whole lot of room. The midline is at -5. The cycle is going to start at -pi over 4. And since this is a cosine function, it's going to start at a maximum, and we saw that the maximum value was -3. So, bloop. And then the cycle is going to end at 15 pi over 4. And it will be back up at a maximum. Forgot my pi. Halfway in between 15 pi over 4 and negative pi over 4, it's going to be at a minimum, because sine or cosine reaches a minimum halfway through its cycle. We know the minimum is -7. So put dot right there. We need to figure out this x value, which you get by averaging the beginning and the end. To find, anytime you need to find something that's halfway between two numbers, you can average them. 15 pi over 4 minus pi over 4 gives you 14 pi over 4. Divide by 2 gives you 7 pi over 4. Right? And then cosine's going to hit the midline halfway between 7 pi over 4 and 15 pi over 4, 22 pi over 4, so that's going to be 11 pi over 4. Again, I got that by averaging. If you want to, you can pause this and work that out for on your own. This is going to be 3 pi over 4. Let me double check. Yep. And here, I'll change colors to actually draw in the cosine cycle. There we go. Okay. Next example. All right. Running out of time. This is what I just did on the previous page. So, and it actually has a graph. So you can practice graphing it here. It has all the information I just filled in. Okay, so next example. Midline is 1, amplitude is 4, means the max is going to be 5, the minimum is going to be -3. There is no horizontal shift, so it's going to start at 0. Here in this problem, k is 3, which means that the period is 2 pi over 3. So the cycle will start at 0. When we add the period, we get that the cycle will end at 2 pi over 3. Okay, so let's graph some of that. Start with the midline. It's at 1. Bloop, 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 bloop. Bloop, 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 bloop. The maximum is at 5. The minimum is going to be at -3. This is a sine cycle, so it's going to start at the midline. Because there's a negative out front, it's going to go down first. So cycle ends at 2 pi over 3. That means halfway through the cycle is going to be 2 pi over 6. Oh, it's just pi over 3. Quarter of the way through is pi over 6. And then 3 pi over 6. Pi over 2. All right, so again, I got these numbers by, I knew the start was 0, I knew the ending was at 2 pi over 3, and then to get this point, I averaged those two numbers. To get pi over 2, I averaged pi over 3 and 2 pi over 3. To get pi over 6, I averaged 0 and pi over 3. Okay, so sine starts at the midline. Because of the negative sign out front, it's going to go down first, so it's going to reach a maximum at pi over 6, a quarter of the way through the period. Halfway through the period is back at the midline. 3/4 of the way through the period, we're at a maximum. And then at the end of the period, we're back at the midline. So you get a graph that looks like this. One last thing here. I will need to pause this to finish it. So here I see that there's a number multiplying the variable and there's a horizontal shift. Before you can start graphing, you need to factor out the number that's multiplying the variable and divide this number by whatever you're factoring out. So pi over 2 divided by 2 is pi over 4. So that's standard form. Okay, so I'm going to pause this and fill in the information for this problem, and then the answer will appear. So you can try it on your own. But hang on one second. Okay, so this is the completed problem. All the information is here that you need to graph. Because it is a cosine function with a negative number up front, we're going to start down at the bottom and then connect the dots like this. Thanks.